YouTube has a long, depressing history of apologies. PewDiePie has basically mastered them at this point. The Paul brothers are walking apologies, and hundreds of others have taken to their channels to admit they were wrong and vowed to do better, to be better. Well, today marks the day we join this elite group of apologizers. That's right, we were wrong. You see, recently after we uploaded our $1,000 build video, many of you pointed out that we were being silly and stupid for choosing to go with the Ryzen 5-2400G. You said that the system deserved better than 4 cores and 8 threads. You said that pairing a 2400G with a dedicated graphics card would be a waste because of its Vega integrated graphics. You said that the additional cost of a better CPU would be justified for the additional performance we'd gain. And you know what? We said no. Our 4-core, 8-thread 2400G was obviously the best choice. It's fantastically priced. It has that Vega iGPU in case something happens to your graphics card. And come on, for 1080p games, they just don't benefit from higher core and thread counts. Everyone knows that, right? Right? Well, because so many of you chimed in, we actually decided to test that to show how right we are. And we're so sorry. You see, our reasoning behind picking the 2400G seemed pretty sound at the time. It fell perfectly into our $1,000 price point. We only went over budget by $8, and we honestly believed that it would be ideal for gaming at 1080p. But as we discovered when we pitted it against other similarly priced processors, including the Ryzen 5-1600, the Ryzen 5-2600, and the Intel i5-8400, we found that that wasn't really the case, and we were completely wrong. And I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry! So let's get into the benchmarks. So first up, let's take a look at the 2400G versus the 1600. So even though we never considered using the 1600 in the build because it's effectively been replaced by the 2600 and its end of life, it was never gonna make it because it's not for sale new. Technically, everything that's on sale right now is overstocked. We still decided to test it because why not? Because it's still a good idea if you're gonna be buying it for yourself. It just wasn't the premise of the build. So we benchmarked the 1600 with the exact same BIOS settings as the 2400G and ran all of our benchmarks at the same 1080p resolution with high details, low anti-aliasing. And right off the bat, we suspected that we screwed up. We made the wrong decision as Ashes of the benchmark jumped from an average FPS of 61 with the 2400G to 68 when powered by the 1600. That's an 11% increase. Far Cry 5 deepened our suspicion even more, jumping from 66 to 74, a 12% increase. Final Fantasy 15 and Muller Shadow of War were the only 2 games we tested that saw a single-digit percentage increase, with the former enjoying a 6.5% increase and the latter jumping up by 8%. But then, just to rub salt in our wounds, Assassin's Creed Origins came in with a massive leap from 60 to 71 average FPS, a friggin' 18% increase. And while slightly less impressive, Fortnite also showed a big 11% increase, going from 116 FPS to 129. 1% and 0.1% lows were also much improved on the system equipped with the 1600, with Final Fantasy being the only one that experienced significant stuttering. Now, other than being an older processor that's already been succeeded, we also passed on the 1600 because it's about 15 bucks more expensive than the 2400G. That $15 looked like a lot when we were trying to stick to our $1,000 budget. But switching out our 2400G for the 1600 would have only increased the total system cost by around 1.5%. Now, performance gains of between 6.5 to 18% seem more than worth that 1.5% price increase, and we're idiots for not realizing that sooner. My methodology here was totally flawed. I was looking at the raw cost of the CPU. I was saying the 1600 is 15% more expensive than the 2400G, and it doesn't give you 15% more frames, except for Assassin's Creed. But the issue with that is that we're not swapping out any of the other parts. We're just swapping out the CPU, and so if we look at the total system cost, which is what I should have been doing, and I was an idiot for not doing that, I came to the wrong conclusion. I was wrong. We'll be better. We'll be better. We'll do better. We are better. Sorry. But we were never going to use the 1600 anyway, so let's move on to its replacement, the 2600. So the 2400G versus the 2600. And contrary to to what many of you might be thinking, we actually thought long and hard about picking the 2600 for our system. It's not like we didn't have one, but it seemed slightly overkill and its higher price didn't seem worth what we thought would have been a minimal 1080p performance increase. Well, to continue here with our theme, we were dead wrong again. Because the 2600 is basically just a beefed up version of the 1600, we expected performance to be about the same throughout, and it totally was. It's basically negligible. The 2600 and 1600's average FPS in Ashes of the Singularity, Far Cry 5, and Final Fantasy were identical, and their 1% and 0.1% lows were equally uninteresting from each other. Shadow of War gained a single additional frame per second, as did Assassin's Creed Origins, bringing the percentage gains there to 9% and 20% respectively over the 2400G. Surprisingly enough, the 2600 performed slightly worse than the 1600 in Fortnite, but again, only by a single frame, which can be due to so many factors when benchmarking Fortnite, like how many people are shooting at us, where we lay. Like, we try to keep it as static as possible when benchmarking Fortnite, but there's so many different factors that we can't keep it completely the same. So that 1 FPS is negligible. So had we gone for the 2600 instead of the 2400G, our system would have cost us 4% more total. The CPU is 20% more, but the total cost would have been 4% more, which was entirely technically within our budget. If you can afford $1,008, you can kind of afford $1,028, which was, you know, our mistake. So especially considering a performance increase of 6.5 to 20%, that 4% increase in total price would have made a ton of sense. Now at this point, it was abundantly clear which CPU we should have gone for, but to throw it in, where did I put that? The i5-8400 has to be in consideration as well because so many of you mentioned it. It's roughly within the same price bracket and the motherboards are similarly low end, so we're gonna see how the 2400G compares to the 8400. There was a brief time after Intel finally launched their cheaper chipset motherboards, the B360, H310 and all of that, where we sort of liked the i5-8400. It was a dark time indeed, but soon enough we came to our senses, which is why we never consider it for any build, at least not at its current price. But there was a possibility that would outperform the 2400G because, I mean, we were clearly wrong about the 2600, so we had to see what it's made of, and no, it's made of poop. The 8400 not only performed worse throughout all of our 4 processors that we took a look at with this testing, it did it significantly so. It was almost 10 frames slower in Ashes of the Singularity, 23 frames slower in Far Cry 5, 6 frames slower in Final Fantasy 15, 5 in Shadow of War, and 18 in Assassin's Creed Origin, and 3 frames slower in Fortnite. So if you don't play Fortnite, it should basically be okay. The 8400 performed so badly that we were convinced that there was something wrong with the system and our testing methodology because we were just like, holy crap, this is behind. But no, after hours, actually hours of trying various different things, checking RAM speeds, checking RAM timing, checking temperatures, checking boost clocks, making sure that it's actually achieving the boost clocks that it's saying it was going to, was actually at 3.8 gigahertz on all 6 cores. It just turns out that the chip is really that bad compared to the other 3. So it doesn't change a whole lot, as we were never likely to consider Intel for this over the 2400G, but we didn't expect 6 physical cores to be all that worse than 4 cores and 8 threads for gaming. But my friends, 8 threads seems to be a minimum in most games right now. Like, you'd be better off going with Z270 and getting a 7700. That would be a better choice than the 8400, guaranteed. And Z270, you don't even have to do that. B250 in a i7-7700 would make so much more sense. So the processors we looked at, or at least 3 of them, are all good choices for 1080p system. This thing, no. But we set out to build a beastly 1080p crushing rig, and for that purpose, both 1600 and the 2600 were the best choices. As we previously explained, we were never going to use the 1600 because it's a little older than the tooth, it's technically end of life, and we couldn't get it for the build, even though we have one in the office, and so we used it for this comparison purposes. That being said, there was practically 0 performance difference in our testing between the 1600 and the more expensive 2600 replacement with a GTX 1060. That's the big thing here. The 2600 is definitely a better processor than the 1600, has better IPC and can clock higher, but the big thing is that it doesn't matter for 1080p gaming with the GTX 1060. If you want a 1080 Ti, then we probably would see some bottlenecking by the 1600 that could be alleviated FCA by the 2600, but any performance advantage that the 2600 did offer wasn't enough to justify the $24 price difference between that and the 1600, if that's what you're considering. If you can find a 1600 new, absolutely pick it up instead of the 2400G. It was kind of stupid. If we recommended that anyone else build a similar system, we would 100% suggest they go with the 1600. However, if you really want to cut costs wherever possible or need something akin to a placeholder CPU, the 2400G still really isn't a terrible choice. We didn't do anything majorly wrong. Sure, it proved to be significantly inferior to the 1600 and 2600, but it comes in at a lower price and has a really decent iGPU baked in. It still offers a ton of value to the right build. This just wasn't one of them. Anyways, the point here is that you were all right. We were all wrong. That was a bunch of CPUs falling. And we were so convinced that we were right that we didn't listen to all of the comments claiming otherwise, and we built an inferior system because of that. That's 100% my bad. And even though the system we built was still perfectly fine for 1080p gaming, you check out that video to see the actual benchmarks, it wasn't nearly as good as it could have been had we just switched the 2400G for the 2600. The performance gain was more than enough to justify a relatively small increase in overall budget, and we should have known better. I was just comparing it incorrectly. And that's my bad. Thank you all so much for calling us out on it. We actually appreciate the community feedback, and we're totally willing to test things to make sure that our assumptions are correct, and they clearly weren't. And so, yeah, people are gonna take this and be like, you're wrong, you were wrong. Remember this time you were wrong? Yes, and I can admit it, I was wrong. I'm sorry, thank you for forgiving us. I'm asking for your forgiveness, please forgive me. Anyways, big thanks to Wootware for sponsoring all of the PC components that we needed to do the build and the testing for this, because the 1600, 2600, 2400, all from Wootware, they're amazing. They sent everything over for us to do this. So if you're in South Africa and you're looking for a great place to build a new PC or upgrade your current rig, Wootware has the price, the selection, and the customer support team to make it a fantastic experience. So be sure to check them out at the link in the video description, wootware.co.za, to woot up your rig. Go check them out. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Be sure to let us know what other comparison testing you want us to do going forward. Obviously, I will try to refrain from making such bold claims in the future about what I think I know, because clearly I know nothing, Jon Snow. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for here. Be sure to smash that like button if you enjoyed this video. Please get subscribed to stay up to date on all of our tech-related content, including the things that I'm wrong about. I'm Brett with the UFD Tech channel, and I'll see your smiling faces again later. Cheers. I need to take acting classes so I can learn how to cry on cue.